Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to do a few more items on the agenda before we get to the next delegation. It was scheduled for 7:30. So on intergovernmental affairs, number one was the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, the Lincoln M. Alexander Award nominees they're looking for. Number two was the City of Guelph, the Clyde Well EA has been completed. Number three was the Township of Madawaska Valley. They're looking for standard tools and funding to assist them with asset management. Number four was the Municipal Affairs, delegation request for AMO before July 3rd. Councilor Spoulis?
Yeah, I was wondering if we should consider doing a delegation in case the government gets changed at that time.
Well, we have till July 3rd, so I suggest we wait until after the election and find out what's happening and then figure out exactly who we want to meet with,
Absolutely.
what minister or ministries, and what we want to discuss at that point in time. You okay with that?
Yep, absolutely.
Number five was the City of Toronto, a response to inclusionary zoning. And you can see by reading through that they have a number of challenges with proposal. Number six was the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, 2 decision notices. Water systems are going to require source water approval to be in place before they're going to give permits, and general requirements including to do with pipelines. Number 7 was Guelph Aramosa Township, a zoning change, and that's for the Signy plant proposal that we've read about in the Wellington Advertiser. Number 8 was Municipal Affairs, Minister Morrow, his response regarding the study area for the Greenbelt, responding to our letter. Councillor Spoulis?
I just want to make a comment. I think the response was questionable, it's puzzling, and all of the above.
Noted. Number 9, the Minister of Seniors Affairs, Minister Demerla, Senior of the Year nomination. And number 10, Conservation Halton, the 2018 budget apportionment. And we've had some discussions already about how the apportionment's changing around. Conservation authorities. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Spoulis and seconded by Councillor Fielding that the intergovernmental affairs correspondence items listed on the council agenda for the April 18th, 2018 council meeting be received. All those in favor? That's carried. Next up, reports, fire department. Okay, the next up is number 9.3A. Mr. Fielding, I think you wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
Yeah. And the CAO would like to speak to this.
Yes, I just wanted to make council aware that the printing of the report indicates that the address for the matter is 4062, and it should be 4058. And I also before council considered this matter, I just want council to be aware that in this particular case, the building permit, which is for the sign, has been issued, but action or construction hasn't taken place pending the outcome of this particular report.
All right, so I have a motion moved by Councillor Spoulis and seconded by Councillor Fielding that report ADM 2018-016 regarding the sign bylaw variance for 4058 Highway 6 be received, and the council grant a variance for the sign bylaw to permit a double-sided illuminated pylon sign at 4058 Highway 6 with a setback of 3.71 meters from the Highway 6 property limit and a maximum copy area on each side of 25.68 square meters. Any discussion on that? Councillor Bulmer.
Councillor Fielding declared a conflict on this one. Should we have someone else second the motion, perhaps?
Oh,
Sorry.
geez, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Would that
good
be-
point. And- No. Thank you, Councillor Bulmer. So same motion, only moved by Councillor Spoulis and seconded by Councillor Routh. Any other discussion on it? All those in favor? That's carried. Okay. All right. Under planning and building, the county planning report. Oh, that's actually a delegation here tonight. We'll talk about that. The March 2018 building report. Motion moved by Councillor Spoulis and seconded by Councillor Fielding that council receives the March 2018 building report. All those in favor? That's carried. Things are going well in the building department. Busy. And we have a delegation on the next one there, too, so we'll leave that until after we've heard from the delegation.
Any minutes, Mr. Mayor?
No, I'm at the Recreation Department regarding the report.
Do you want to start that?
Yeah, okay, I'll have to come back to that then. Let's do this. I have a motion moved by Councillor Routh and seconded by Councillor Bulmer that council receives the following committee minutes: February 13th, 2018 Planning and Development Advisory Committee and the February 13th, 2018 Committee of Adjustment. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? That's carried. And I don't have any areas of dates. Well, I think we're just going to wait until past and we'll go back to the delegations now, because the other items that are here are likely to take a while.
Municipal announcements?
Yeah, okay, we can go do, all right, municipal announcements. Councillor Roth.
Just that Saturday is our annual Green Legacy tree giveaway. Not sure of the hours. I think all of council is going to be there, so we'll have lots of help. We're asking that people bring a donation to the food bank for exchange of some free trees. Councillor Sapoulis probably knows better than me how many trees we have.
I can tell you, we got 2,500 white spruce to hand out.
And that's just white spruce.
That's us white spruce. The rest
Anyway, I
of them
hope
probably add
everybody
up
can
to-
make it out to that and get a tree. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bulmer.
Oh, nothing new, thanks.
Councillor Fielding.
Yes, two things, Mr. Mayor. I was asked to extend a thank you on behalf of the delegation that came from Hamilton Conservation. They were very impressed with our council and were so happy to see that we were engaged and asking questions, which is a very different scenario that they get than they get at a lot of the presentations they give at other councils. So there was a nice compliment to our Puslinch Council. And also the Friends of Mill Creek, the Mill Creek Rangers are hiring this summer, and they are accepting applications on their website. So if you know of any young people that are interested, that would be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Spillis.
Yeah, just to follow up on Councillor Roth, the Legacy Tree giveaway is 8:30 till 11. Second thing is, I attended the Clare Maltby Secondary Plan Public House after the charrette. The mayor was there as well, and the final recommendation has some concern with respect to the high development of their high-intensity they're proposing at Maltby and Gordon. So perhaps we can ask the staff from Guelph to come and talk to us about that and just give us an overview on that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, so 2 weeks ago, I attended the Wellington Advertiser 50th celebration. It was quite an event and well covered in the Advertiser, of course, but just to remind everybody that the entire Advertiser for the last 50 years is now on the Wellington County website under the Archives section. It's one of 7 databases there, and they're large files, so be a little patient. But you can go back and look at the complete Advertiser for all of those 50 years, and it's searchable. So if you have a particular topic in mind, you can go in and search that topic, and it'll show you the editions where that, whatever you searched on, shows up. So it's quite a feature. I just want to let council know that we've had a number of severances in Puslinch Township that have come to Land Division Committee, and they've been denied or deferred, depending on what they wanted to do, as a result of the new agricultural system. One of those proposals is being appealed, and so they're waiting to see what will happen with the appeal on that one and how some of the other ones may go forward. One of the big issues of contention is the effective date. And the legislation actually changed last summer. In fact, it was mentioned here tonight in our public meeting earlier, but the mapping wasn't issued till February. And there's difference of opinion on when it's effective. We believe it's effective as of last summer in July when it was issued. So you'll be hear more about that. And also on February 27th, a week Friday, there's going to be a focus group over at the community center. The county is looking at the possibility of a continuum of care facility. And there will be ads about that in the Advertiser coming up this week. So that there's a focus group about that. You'll see more about it in the paper.
You don't mean February 27th?
April,
What did I say?
February.
Sorry, Friday the 27th was what I meant to say.
All right, good.
You're right, I didn't mean February. It was Friday, April 27th. I apologize for that. Thank you for that clarification. And that's all I had. And with that, we'll go back to the delegations at 7:30. We have Crime Stoppers of Guelph, Wellington. Sarah Bowes Peter is here with a flag.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I know it's been a couple of years now, I guess, since I've been around, and have a short update to give you, just to let you know what Crime Stoppers has been up to, and hopefully at the end we're able to get a quick photo that we can post and promote the partnership we have with the Township of Puss Lynch. First of all, this is the 30th anniversary of Crime Stoppers Guelph Wellington. We were incorporated in August of 1988, so it's a big year for us, and certainly we're trying to generate as much awareness about the program, which is part of why I'm making such a concerted effort to get around and see everybody at the municipal level. We have events and announcements. We've kind of staggered them throughout the year. The next one, which I can give you a little sneak peek, we recently acquired a new vehicle for the program, and we will be officially announcing it and launching it next week. But it's very exciting to have a reliable vehicle and being able to cover the whole county and the city of Guelph, and making sure that we're promoting and having that moving billboard image with a vehicle. It's wonderful. We've been busy with a number of initiatives, and I know this has been touched on recently in the media, human trafficking being something that we took up last year, and certainly not something that we would want to see happening in this area, but unfortunately it's a reality here, and we're drawing attention to that in relation to our police partners, and that's going over very well. We're getting a very good feedback as far as people saying they're understanding and learning and seeing the connection between this crime and how they can use Crime Stoppers to help combat that. We developed a program called It Takes a Village, and that's something that we're looking to continue to help with crimes against youth. So cyber safety, online stalking, that type of thing, and human trafficking for children. And we will be, as I mentioned, posting that again this year. We've had some success that we've received awards, and you may have heard of them already, but we're very proud to have won our first international awards last fall. That was for our website, as well as one for our TV feature with Whiteman TV. And the third award was for our online excellence, so it's our social media presence. And I would encourage you all to follow us, so on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, those are all my plugs. And certainly check out our website. We're very proud of our website. This was followed by our Ontario Association Awards. We've won them in 2015 and 2016, and we just submitted for last year for 2017, so fingers crossed we're successful again this year. And just to give you an idea, because we can't talk about the specific cases that we help with, but we can indeed share the statistics for the program. So again, from 1988 until the end of March 2018, the program has received 19,694 tips. We've cleared 2,252 cases. Charges as a result of those cases are 4,257. We've recovered in excess of $37 million in drugs and personal property. And the board of directors, who of course runs the program, have approved rewards in excess of $164,000. So basically for every dollar that the board is approving in a reward, we're bringing back $245 in personal property and illegal drugs. So that's, when you see our road signs and you see that there are a lot of banks, insurance companies, that is why. They see the return on the investment with Crime Stoppers. So just to let you know, we are fundraising, because that is our main method of covering our rewards for our tipsters. We have a mulch sale in Mount Forest on April 28th. We have the next mulch sale in Fergus on May 5th. We would love to have an event
Here?
in the township of Puss Lynch. So if there's ever an opportunity, please think of us. And I know, Mr. Mayor, you've been very supportive of our shredding events in the fall, and I appreciate that. But we would like to see, events in each of the communities that we serve, and we know we've solved crimes in the township of Puss Lynch. So would certainly love to be able to partner locally with that. Wanted to also touch on in my closing remarks here that our program would not exist were it not for volunteers. So it's very appropriate that tonight I'm here and you're recognizing a volunteer in your community. Our board of directors are volunteers. The people who come out to our various fundraising events are volunteers. So we totally recognize the role that they play in the success of our program. So unless there's any questions, I would be happy to pose.
Oh, there's bound to be some kind of.
Okay.
Counselor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, happy anniversary.
Well, thank you.
30 years, it doesn't seem like that long ago.
No,
So you got some pretty impressive numbers there with money recovered and cases solved, and that's really impressive. I didn't realize it was to that extent. So I congratulate you. And is it something that continually grows with calls? Do you get more and more calls all the time? Or?
Yeah, right now, when I started, we were averaging between 30 and 40 tips a month. We're now averaging over 70 a month. And I think that's because we've tried to increase our awareness. We're certainly trying to be more present, which is good. I think the crime has probably always been there. It's just been a case of people not necessarily knowing how to utilize the program. And therefore, with that awareness, the phone rings, which is good.
And the fact that they don't have to identify themselves.
Absolutely, completely anonymous. Their information is confidential.
Well, thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. I will take that back to our board.
Counselor Bulmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening.
Good evening.
You mentioned human trafficking. And the first I heard of this, of course, it was not that many years ago, and it was always in relation to, not always, but often in relation to some of the vehicle stops along the 401. But I suspect my understanding of that is not complete. But does it still relate largely to the 401 and places where people stop and start on the 401?
That is the most conducive environment for human trafficking, but we're not just focusing on the crime happening and where it's happening, because I know when I talk about this outside of the city of Guelph, a lot of the response is, well, that doesn't happen here, wherever here is, not being in the city of Guelph. The truth is we're trying to prevent victims. We're trying to educate the public and our young people. I did 3 presentations today in the city of Guelph, and talking to kids as young as grade 5 about, be aware and know what's happening, and if you see something happening to a friend, and certainly keeping it at an age-appropriate level, but that's the age that these individuals are going for. The children is 12, 13-year-old kids. So we certainly don't want to have them going into this blind and not understanding that they're being groomed for something pretty heinous. And that's why we've made a point of reaching out and not just focusing on, is this a 401 corridor, is this a Guelph issue? I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think we also have to look at preventing that crime.
I'm glad to hear you're looking for a place for a mulch sale. I may be contacting you with a different hat on.
Oh, wonderful, okay. Always open to that.
Many hats he wears. Counselor Fielding?
Thank you for your presentation, Sarah. It's always great, and it's a good news story. Picking up on what you were saying, I think we sometimes get a little smug in the rural areas, thinking, oh, those are all city problems and so on, and feel we're quite insulated from those things. But when you actually look at statistics and where things are happening, often because we have a lot of isolated properties and so on, things often do happen there, like drug manufacturing and things like that, and as you say, the human trafficking and so on. So it's good that you're making people aware in all areas, and I really think in rural areas of Wellington County, we need to wake up and know that we're all a part of this. So I think you're doing a great job promoting that.
And we would be open to doing a presentation if there's a community group here that would like a Crime Stoppers presentation. We have a standard, how to use the program. We also have a separate human trafficking program, presentation that we'd be more than happy, and people can just go through our website to contact us on that.
Okay, that's great. I think the public education is a big factor in raising the awareness of what you're doing. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Counselor Saboulis?
Yes, congratulations on 30 years, and keep on going. It's very important to have some program like this in the community. And following up on Councillor Fielding's point, I think it'd be good to have something in our community. We'll see if we can arrange some sort of venue or event to have you come by. And lastly, with respect to the mulch, maybe next year we can think about the green tree legacy. Get a tree to come and buy the mulch.
That would work.
That'd be
Yeah.
awesome.
Real good pairing, yeah.
And it doesn't have to be mulch. If there's something unique that you want to make your own, you can certainly do that as well.
Okay, so that'd be great.
Yeah, I think the mulch is, how do you acquire the mulch?
It's through Alltreat. Arthur delivers to Fergus, and then we have a retail partner, Young's Home Hardware in Mount Forest.
Yeah, that's
and
what-
Yeah, so if there's someone that we could purchase additional and then retail it that way, probably that's the way to go about it.
Okay.
We'll set up a committee for that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for coming. You're right, it has been a while since we've seen you last, and I'm sure the last time you were here, we posed with the flag for a picture, and I see the flag is here again, so
again.
I'm expecting that's what we're going to do right now, is it?
Okay, that's okay.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I think what we did was we strung it around the front here, didn't we?
Yes.
Is that how we did it?
Yes,
So
you
we
did.
can all go stand over there.
Yeah, maybe we should make it a bit
Yeah,
different
a
than the
little
old
different
one.
this time. So we're going to come out,
Over
we'll
there.
stand over there.
Okay.
Well, that's okay.
Watch your head on the TV.
Let's pull the TV back to
Yeah, all back down.
That's it.
You're good. Oh, over here? I think so.
So I have a motion moved by Counselor Fielding and seconded by Counselor Sapulis. The council receives the presentation by Crime Stoppers Guelph Wellington with respect to the 30th anniversary. All those in favor? That's carried. All right, next we have Nestle Waters Canada. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is this going to be okay like this?
Oh,
Yep,
Yeah,
be okay.
okay. Good evening, Mayor Lever, council, and staff. Thanks for allowing us to provide you with a delegation this evening to address the recent Hardin environmental report. We've had time to review it. We found that although some of the terminology used is a bit different than what we typically use in these sorts of scientific evaluations, there is a lot that we do agree on, but we do feel that there are some things that we want to provide clarity on, and that's why we're here today. I'm here with one of our third-party experts, Chris Neville, and I'll let him do a quick intro, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah, I'm a professional engineer, and I live and work in Waterloo, and I've been there for 30 years. And my role as a consultant to other consultants is mostly what I do, and I am a professional pain in the neck. And so I've earned the title of data police. And for Nestle, but for other clients, I make sure that the data are reliable and that the interpretations drawn from it are defensible.
And in the essence of time, we're just going to flip through a few slides and go back to them if we have time. But I first wanted to go over quickly Nestle Waters takings in perspective. This is a table. The table in this slide is taken directly from the Hardin Environmental Report. We have added one line item, which is the cumulative permitted groundwater takings for other Puss Lynch industrial pumping. And as shown on the table, our pumping is relatively a small portion of all the water takings in our township. As I mentioned earlier, there's a few parts of the Hardin report that are consistent with our interpretations and do support our conclusions. Chris is going to provide an illustration using our data to understand exactly, or to understand a few terms that are not typically what we use, specifically the term artesian and depressurized.
So what I've shown here is I've reproduced a plot of the water levels in the Nestle production well, TW380, and I've added to that the geologic column. And the white rectangle at the bottom indicates the open interval of the well, and it's located in the Amabel Aquifer. And then above that is the confining unit, it's called the Aramosa Aquitard. And there's a couple of key things I wanted you to note from this illustration. The first is that the lowest water level, so there's two water levels, basically with the well not pumping, that's the upper blue line, and with the lower blue line is with the well pumping. And as you can see, to get water into a well, any well, whether it's a TW380 or our private wells, you have to depress the water levels locally around the well. So there does have to be a decline in water levels to get water into a well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that each division on this chart represents a year. So over the past 3 years or so, the pumping has been very steady, almost the same pattern from year to year. And similarly, the water levels have been steady. So when the pumping is increased, the water levels drop. When the pumping is cut back, the water levels recover. But the important thing is that there's no real long-term decline in the water levels, no declining trend in the water levels. Another thing to note is that when the well was built, before Nestle took over the well, it was reported that the water level in the well was about 11.5 feet below ground surface. So the well was never artesian. Hydrogeologists use the word artesian to refer to flowing wells. So in an area where there's flowing wells, if you take off a cap, the water naturally flows out. But here the water level is about 12 feet below ground surface, so the water level was never artesian. But the water level is above the top of the Amabel Aquifer. And so the term we use, it's a confined aquifer. And the confinement comes from the higher land on both flanks of the valley, in which case the well is located. Okay?
All right. This slide represents something that supports our report, and we do agree that there has been a leveling off of the water elevations in the past 3 years. And Chris is gonna.
And what I wanted to show again, this is the pumping rate history, and now I've added the black line. That's the pumping history, and the pumping goes up and down in response to annual demand for Nestle's products. And as you can see, the water levels, when it's pumped harder, the water levels drop. And when the pumping is cut back, the water levels increase again. So the water levels recover. In fact, the water levels almost recover to the non-pumping level that when the well was built in the first place. So we interpret the Hardin environmental reference to leveling off as being basically a similar trend from year to year. Because what we're really concerned about is a long-term declining trend, and we don't see that in any of the data. Next slide.
All right. These three conclusions from the Hardin report are completely consistent with our conclusions that we presented in our annual report. There is no indication of a long-term declining trend in the groundwater levels, both in the overburden and the surface water levels due to our takings. And there's a few things, as I mentioned earlier, that we would like to clarify a little bit further, although there are many things that we do agree on. A few things are such as our pumping volumes did not increase in 2017. In fact, they decreased by about 2%. The hydrographs suggest a relationship between pumping and water levels and do not show a long-term declining trend, as Chris mentioned earlier. And the water levels in the aquifer in 2017 remained consistent with the 2015 and 16 levels, where pumping rates were very similar.
just to illustrate that, this is the water level history. So each major division on the line is a year. And I've highlighted with the red rectangle the past 3 years. And as you can see from the black line, that's the pumpage. The pumpage has basically been a very similar trend from year to year. As Andréane said, the total takings in 2017 was just a little bit less than in 2015 and 16. And the water levels, the blue line is the water levels in the pumped aquifer, the Amabel. And the water levels they go up and down in response to pumping, but there's no long-term declining trend. And neither is there in the red line, that's in the overlying Guelph, the upper bedrock aquifer, or the green line that denotes the overburden. So the water level trends are stable. That's the key thing as our check on the sustainability of the water takings.
All right.
Okay. Now, the Hardin Environmental Report includes some very almost inflammatory language about the City of Guelph's WAPA Q1. So I thought I'd spend a little bit of time going over what exactly that WAPA Q1 represents. First of all, it's very important to note that it's the cumulative effect of all pumping in their model area. And that includes not only the City of Guelph's municipal pumping, the City of Cambridge's municipal pumping, Nestle's water takings, all of the industrial takings, including water takings for aggregate and for Royal Canin, and the smaller scale private water takings at the Meadows of Aberfoyle and Mini Lakes. So the WAPA Q1 is the drawdown cone. As I said, to get water into a well, you have to depress the water levels, and the WAPA Q1 is the drawdown cone for everybody's pumping. Okay. And just to highlight that, what I've on the right is taken from the Guelph Tier 3 report, and that's the WAPA Q1 is the red line, and it was delineated as the 2-meter level of drawdown. Okay, and down in the corner, the pink circle down, sort of in the lower lower right-hand corner, is the drawdown cone of all of the industrial takings around Nestle Well. So including TW380, but all of the other takings. And that's highlighted on the left slide, which I've also taken from the Tier 3 report. And that shows just where all these wells are in their model. And as you can see, there's quite a concentration of wells in addition to Nestle's there. Right? So the critical point is that the WAPA Q1 is the cumulative effect of everybody. We haven't done any analyses yet to identify just what Nestle's taking, effect of Nestle's taking is, and that's being done in conjunction with the City of Guelph's groundwater modeling consultant. So that's underway now.
Okay.
Okay?
Good with this?
Yeah, I'll take that. And it's the other point about the WAPA Q1 is that this is where I thought the language was a bit inflammatory, because basically it reads as if Nestle's takings is going to be a threat to Puzzlinch municipal takings or any private takings in this area. And it's really not that way at all. What has happened is that the City of Guelph, the Queensdale well, which is about 12 kilometers away, the modeling suggested that it wouldn't be able to meet demand under drought conditions. So the whole area gets assigned a high significant risk level, and anybody who happens to be within the WAPA Q1 is tarred with the same brush and is identified as a significant threat, right? But it's really the municipal pumping that is the threat to everybody else. And so it's not really Nestle that's causing the threat to the City of Guelph, but rather the other way around. Okay. But so, as I said, the analyses to identify just precisely what is Nestle's taking, that's underway now under the new guidance for bottled water. So
recent press release about that.
yeah, okay, go ahead.
And then finally, just a quick follow-up on your question, Councillor Sapoulis, on the common reed. It's invasive and it's well-established in Southern Ontario. It is salt-tolerant, and conventional control methods such as herbicides and pesticides just simply don't work for us. And we want to protect the groundwater resource, and it doesn't meet our groundwater protection standards. We have done some experimental trials using tarps to smother the colonies. However, it's a bit impractical when you're looking at mixed stands because we don't want to impact existing native species or vegetation. But we continue to monitor and look for alternatives, and we will certainly keep council informed on that topic. And finally, in conclusion, we want to thank you for allowing us to come here today to provide you with a few clarifications. We really want you to know that we are a responsible user and will continue to do everything we can to protect the resource in our community, because we want to make sure it's here not just today, but for the future generations. The future employment of our 300 and plus employees depend on us to continue to be a responsible user and continue to properly manage the resource for sustainability for years to come. And that is what we have today. We're open to questions.
Thank you very much. Councilor Roth.
Thank you very much for your comments to our consultant's review of your annual report. These comments seem very factual to me and raise some questions. My problem is I'm not really qualified to get into a debate with the experts, so I would like to reserve my questions until I hear from our consultant to reply to your comments of his report. Thank you.
Councilor Ballmer.
Okay, but did you want to get a reply?
Well, we'll go around once and then see where we go from there.
Good evening. I must admit, when I read Hardin Environmental's report, I thought it was largely neutral or slightly positive. It actually, I felt, when I read it, confirmed much of what you had indicated in your report. So I was a little surprised at the concern you had with it, because I read it as being one of the most positive yet. And as though you have concerns with the use of the word artesian, that was one of the words that helped change my understanding and see things in a different light down there. Up until now, I mean, I'd worked with Nestle's in the past to develop that well protection agreement, and based on language, much like you've used tonight about what happens when you turn on a pump in a well, and the image in my mind was always that the water level was drawn down around the well, actually to the bottom of the casing in my mind, and it created this cone of influence or area of depression. And I had always envisioned that this was a part of the aquifer that was dewatered adjacent to the well, and to a lesser extent as you moved farther away. But when I read the word artesian, and read it a couple times more, and when it was actually put in simple plain language for me to see that what he's talking about is that the water level in the well never went below the top of the aquifer, that fundamentally changed how I understood this, and that we're talking about changing in pressure, not necessarily a loss of water there. It's just a changing in the potential, how if without the taking, the water level may have come, as you say, it would no longer be confined, it would come up to a higher level. But with the pumping, we're only decreasing potential. We're not actually dewatering the aquifer there. That was a fundamental change for me. And I thought, in my mind, it identified that how there must be a significant connection to a head pressure somewhere farther away through a much more porous rock than I had ever imagined. And you've half answered my question already. You mentioned that that's coming from, I think you said, the flanks or something of. What I was going to ask is, what is driving that head pressure? Where is that connection that's creating that? You want to prefer the use confinement or aquifer, or as Mr. Denhoed used, the artesian condition, not flowing, but still. Where is that head pressure coming from?
Coming from upland. So we're sort of in the between two moraines here. Mill Creek is between two moraines. Alberfoyle Creek and Mill Creek is between two moraines. You want to bring up that slide? What I did gloss over at the beginning was, so by the way, let me compliment you on your hydrogeologic understanding, because it's flawless. And what is this? This is a shaded relief map. So that's if we could strip away the surface and just show elevations. The red dot is where TW380 is, and we're basically between two moraines, the Paris moraine and the Galt moraine. Those are both highlands. They're permeable. That gets recharged. That's where the water enters the system, and those are basically acting as the water towers, if you will, for the Amabel there. And further north too. So it's both on the flanks. That's the two. It's all like a slot, the two sides of the slot, but also further up gradient. That's towards the northeast. Yeah. So that's what's keeping the water levels up. Water infiltrates in the highland and basically soaks down. If you want to show the cartoon, I think the cartoon is there it is. Now, if the water levels were sufficiently high, then the pressure in the Amabel would be enough for wells to flow.
Right.
But here, they're just, it's about 12 feet below ground surface here. In contrast to the water table around here, I'd take a guess about 1.5 meters, so 5 feet. So if we dug a hole in the surface, that's where the water would basically start to appear.
I appreciate that. So if right now we're talking about last year, but based on what you've said, is it likely that Nestle's takings have ever drawn the water down far enough so to be below the top of that of the confined layer?
What did I show for, how many years did I show the record? Certainly not in the last, how many years have we got there? 5 years. But I think we've been collecting data like this for the last 17 years. So it's never, that's basically about as low as it's gotten, is about 5 to 10 meters above the top of the aquifer. Yeah, so it's never come close. Yeah.
And I'm
that would
glad-
be disastrous, by the way.
That's what I'm thinking, is that's where I'm starting to see through this, is that's where the question of sustainability starts to be asked, and local impact starts to appear, I would imagine.
Yes, you're right.
I'm glad you used the word water towers. The other thing this made me realize is how dependent we are on maintaining recharge on the moraines, but also how dependent this must be then on precipitation. Would it be of any benefit? I'm trying to think of, if they're like water towers, when we start to see them drawing down, we would start to be concerned about the viability of Nestle's pumping in Aberfoyle. Would that be a reasonable?
The timing is really the difference, because it's going to take, since there's a tight layer of rock between the pumped interval and the shallow surface, that about 20 years. Is about that's how long it takes water to percolate. So the age of the water that Nestle pumps is on the order of about 20 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. So it does. So you wouldn't see that effect. And in fact, we've seen when I've taken a close look at the data, there's often been you can certainly see water levels fluctuate in the shallow, but they go up and down in response to climate, and you don't see that similar. It's kind of buffered down below.
Last question, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Just one of the questions we couldn't answer last time was, are there any other large water takers within this WAPA Q1 that you mentioned where their water taking has gone below the top of the aquifer, where they're no longer artesian conditions that you're aware
That's
of?
an excellent question, but I don't know the answer.
Unfortunately, we don't have their data to look
Okay.
at.
All right.
Not everybody posts their data on the website like we do, so.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Well, thank you very much for the visit tonight and the clarifications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Fielding?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think the good news is that there's a lot of commonality between the two reports and a lot of agreements, so that's the good news. And I think what I'm taking from what you're trying to convey to us is that there's other large water takers in the area, and it's not just all Nestle's. I would be interested in hearing our consultant's comments. I can't really comment. I'm not as well-versed as Councillor Bulmer as far as hydrogeological issues, but I understand the message that you're trying to convey, and I think it's done, you're doing it scientifically, and I thank you for your openness of including all those things on your website. I think it's very good, and I wish that more companies would do that. So thank you, and maybe we'll hear from our consultant later.
Councillor Sapoulis?
Yes, thank you for coming and explaining the differences between yours and our consultant's report. I have a couple of questions. The first one has to deal with your slides entitled No Long-Term Declining Trends. I think there's a couple after this one.
After or before?
That one there. I look at the blue line, and I look at 2008, and I look at 2018. Like the peaks are above the 3 trend level in those first few years, and then it dropped down significantly. And I, from a layman's point of view, I look at it, I said, well, that looks like a declining trend. I was wondering if you can explain my thoughts.
Right, no, well, there's a decline, an absolute decline, and it has to do with the pumping has ramped up since 2008 when there was a recession. So there's been a gradual increase in pumping, and over the last 3 years, the pumping has just been about the same, and water levels have been. What really happens in TW380, the harder you pump it, the lower water levels go, and then if you cut back on the pumping, the water levels recover.
Okay, so that's fine. It's a
Yeah,
function
but
of
it's related to the
So you're right.
Yeah, okay.
There is a decline between 2008 and the present date, but there's
Yes.
not been a decline since about 2015.
And what we're seeing is related to pumping.
Yeah.
Okay, that explains my curve. The other statement, like you said you disagreed strongly with our consultant's report with respect to the assessment. I think it's number 3. I didn't take it as that strong. Like, I don't think the consultant was, our consultant's basically saying that interpretation of Hardin's statement is that the significant risk was attributed to Nestle's water. I didn't read that statement in that paragraph. No, I didn't read into it. I think it's a matter of how you come at the problem, how you look at it. I get the fact that there's other water takers in the area, and as you said, it's not only Nestle's, but everybody is a significant risk. Nestle's, even Guelph, City of Guelph, everybody's significant risk once you have that criteria established of, it's a significant risk. Once you have the significant risk designation, everybody is criticized as being a bad actor. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
yeah.
Okay, and lastly, thank you with respect to the invasive weed. I'm glad to see that you're saying you're looking at taking proactive steps. That's good to hear. Look forward to next year's report.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming again and adding this additional dimension to something here. As well as Councillor Bulmer and I believe Councillor Sapoulis, I'm going to ask Mr. Denhout to come up and maybe respond to some of these comments. But I think that we're pretty close to this and understand what's going on. And I think that's part of the challenge is what we saw in the report, we understood as being a part of this. Maybe a third party who wasn't familiar as us, looking at it from a distant view, such as yourself, and simply looking at the words maybe had a different view of it. But I think that certainly the three of us looked at it, and I mean, I looked at it and said, you know, pretty much the same as last year, it's not having a long-term effect. That was sort of my conclusion at the end of the report. So thank you very much for coming, and I'm going to ask Mr. Denhout to come up now, okay?
Thank you, and thank you for your questions.
So I have a motion moved by Councillor Sapoulis and seconded by Councillor Fielding. The council receives a presentation by Nestle's Waters Canada with respect to responses to the Hardin Environmental Review of Nestle Waters 2017 Aberfoyle Annual Report. All those in favor? So as you heard the discussion, Mr. Denhout, welcome.
Yes, good
by the
evening.
way. But we may have some additional questions falling out of this, I think, from Councillor Roth. We'll go around just as we had, but maybe you'd like to respond first before we start these questions.
First of all, I'd like to respond by saying that absolutely, Chris Neville is correct. He is a pain in the keister for every single hydrogeologist in this province because he takes you apart and spits you out again, and better for it at the end. But there are 4 things that have been brought up, and the main one is the coalescing, and what I call the coalescing of the areas of influence between the City of Guelph and Aberfoyle area and City of Cambridge. And I do agree with their point that I should have said the TW380 and others, and Mini Lakes, Royal Canin, Morgard as well, and Concast, and so there are others that take water from the deep aquifer. They are not the only ones. They are the largest. They are, 100% consumption almost of that water from the deep aquifer. And so that was my fault. I should have said, included others in that as well. And when I did the Tier 3 responses, I was very careful to include that. So I do agree. However, they are, a significant factor, and we cannot ignore that at all. And I'm looking forward to the future analysis that Mr. Neville mentioned, that they will be looking at exactly how much Nestle Waters contributes to the area of influence and whether or not they alone, are responsible or how contributory they are to the joining of those. And I guess I'd also like to say that this is all theoretical, right? Unfortunately, this is a groundwater model that has been calibrated to as good of information as possible. But even then, when we are reviewing the Tier 3 model, we are looking for examples of data 30 years ago. Can we prove for a fact that this WAPA-Q1 extends beyond the 401 to the tune of a 2-meter drawdown? And I have looked at the data from Nestle's even along McLean Road, and we're not even seeing that kind of an influence at McLean Road. So that there is an issue of how real is this? And so we're all beholden to it. This was a provincially led study and funded by the province and and coordinated through the GRCA. And unfortunately, we don't have that good historical data, for instance, between the southern end of the city of Guelph and Aberfoyle, the takings in Aberfoyle, and to be, and we've suggested that happen on number of occasions, and we still think that's a good idea going forward. Now, we do have a relatively good idea of the shallow system. We've got 16 groundwater monitors across this township that the township funds for us to get quarterly monitors, quarterly water levels out of, and that's up on our website as well. And so anytime you want to take a look at it, you can see, what are the water levels doing. And in response through you to Councillor Stepulus, is that in fact in 2008, most of our groundwater monitors peak at that point. It's not just that Nestle Waters was taking less water, but in general, the precipitation and the antecedent precipitation before that led to a high point in groundwater levels in 2008 and have been declining since. And so that is, I'm not sure it's province-wide, but definitely if you go to our website and look at the top of the moraine, distant from Aberfoyle, you will see a similar pattern. So it's not only that taking. So the coalescing is an issue. It's not only Nestle Waters. It is all of the taking, but again, Nestle Waters is the largest. To the point of whether or not Nestle Waters taking has created a significant threat. Unfortunately, that is a misread on their part. It's definitely been, and I'm not sure how Mr. Neville got the Queensdale well in there, but during all of the Tier 3 negotiations that we had and studies, it was all related to Arkell well number 1, also in the township of Puslinch. But Arkell number 1 is a overburdened well, and during a drought scenario, the water levels in that well fell below the safe level, and that is what triggered the significant threat. It had nothing to do with the Nestle Waters per se, but it was just the overall the overall taking leads to a low water level in that Arkell well number 1 under a drought condition. Nonetheless, the township of Puslinch is within that area of influence and in the WAPA-Q1 and is beholden to whatever policies the Source Water Protection Committee derives, and they may be very benign. We don't know. We don't know what those are going to look like. But it is. It's a serious consideration for the township going forward as to what new wells can we put in, what new industries can we have. Will that affect the city of Guelph wells? So that I think it's a very. In terms of my duration of being in the township of 25 years, it's one of the most important subjects that's come up for the
So
town.
now I'm going to go to the council members and see if they have any questions specific to you. Councilor Roth?
Yes, thank you. I do have a couple. I'm just trying to relate your comments to what Nestle's just said. Would you agree that the protection zone for Guelph would extend into Pushlands regardless of Nestle Waters Canada?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is, we don't quite know. And this is where I'm saying, I should have said the Nestle wells plus the other water takers. That includes mini lakes at about, in terms of a monthly taking, Nestle's is at between 50 and 70 million a month, liters of water a month. Mini lakes is around 3 million a month. Moorgard, if we believe what their permit to take water allows them at 500,000 a day, they're close to 16.5 million. And Royal Canin is at 200,000, so they're probably close to 6 million a day, a month. So in terms of 50 to 70, the others add up to maybe 25 or 30. So still, the Aberfoyle well is a large taking. When we look at the response to their shutdown, that their shutdown of their well does extend up towards County Road 34. And during that shutdown, we are fortunate enough to then begin to see the responses of Mini Lakes, which is very short-lived. So we can actually see the response of Mini Lakes wells in their monitoring wells, and it's a very short-lived response compared to the relatively continuous taking that we see from TW 380. So my point is that it's a significant taking. It is the most significant taking. It's largely consumptive, and unfortunately, I don't know what percentage is consumptive. I suggest it's very high. I don't know what percentage they return back to the shallow aquifer via cleaning, washrooms and stuff like that. But I really don't know how much of that water comes back from TW 380 into the effort. But my feeling is that it is very significant in terms of that coalescing.
I would take that as you disagree with that statement.
Yes.
They also state that Nestle groundwater withdrawals from TW 380 as well as other private water takers are not significant threats. Do you agree with that?
So the term significant threat is related to the City of Guelph water taking, right? So this is where the term significant threat comes. So because of Arkell well number 1, all of the Wapaki area, including all of Aberfoyle, is because the City of Guelph's wells are considered either the terminology may be significant risk, but because of that Arkell well number 1, everybody in that area it is somewhat contributory to that significant risk designation. But it of themselves are, we can't really say whether or not one well or the other is a significant risk. It's all of them combined has led to that significant risk category. Unlike City of Cambridge, which does not have the significant risk, it has a low risk category assigned to it, which means that there are no policies going to be developed in the Township of Pushlands to protect the City of Cambridge wells. That is much different than what's going to happen with the policies for the City of Guelph.
So the City of Cambridge isn't a threat to the City of Guelph?
That's correct. Yeah, that would be correct.
Do you concur that none of the wells Nestle owns are open across multiple units?
I think the point is that their monitoring wells that they've drilled are set up as multi levels, and they don't connect one aquifer to the other. So I would agree with that statement.
Then why would you put in your report about contamination from wells that penetrate different?
Well, this has been an ongoing issue for a while, right? There are several hundred of these multiple aquifer penetrating wells in the township of Puslinch.
I understand that, but why would it be in Nestle's report?
Because within the hamlet of Aberfoyle, there are, I don't know the number, but there are several, maybe tens of them, including several of the wells that are monitoring wells for Meadows of Aberfoyle. So within their area of influence, there is a strong downward gradient. And so within that area of influence of the Nestle's well, we have this potential for water moving from a shallow aquifer into that lower aquifer. And that is of grave concern to me.
But it's not caused by Nestle's.
Oh, yes, it is.
How can it be caused by Nestle's if their wells aren't penetrating to different units?
Well, they are taking from Chris Neville explained that they are taking from a confined aquifer underneath what's known as the Aramosa aquitard. When you drill a well from the ground surface, you stop there's another aquifer on top of that called the Guelph aquifer. So when you drill a well, and the well drillers all basically stop their protective casing at the top of the rock, and then drill an open hole all the way to the rest of the way. So that means that the Guelph aquifer is connected to this open hole, the Aramosa aquitard is connected, and so is the underlying Gasport Goat Island aquifer. So whenever you depressurize that lower unit, water from these upper units can flow down that well. That's my point.
I understand that, but back to my point, if Nestle's wells don't do that, how can they be causing the contamination?
The Nestle's wells are not causing the private wells could possibly be
Okay.
creating this,
That's-
but they are creating the condition of the downward gradient.
Thank you.
Okay, Counselor Fielding.
I don't have any further questions, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denhoed. Counselor Vollmer and Counselor Sabulis, do you have any questions or anything you'd like clarified in addition to what Nestle's has already stated? But I don't want to go off into separate areas here.
No, that's fine, thank you. Just briefly, thank you for mentioning consumptive wells. I think that's an important difference as well. And that's why I think it's important that we keep in mind that some of these water takings are largely consumptive, like municipal or water bottling, compared to some of these other ones that may be drawing it from the deep bedrock, discharging it to the subs to the shallow, and some that are just recirculating around to the shallow. I think it's important, and I'm always concerned when I see them all lumped into the same impacts. So I'm glad you mentioned the difference, and I believe that Nestle's people did as well, that these consumptive takings do have a bigger impact, so especially the larger municipal ones. So thank you very much.
Okay. Counselor Sabulis?
I just want to make a comment. You question why the city's Queensdale municipal well was mentioned by the previous speakers. It is in a Tier 3 report, and the Tier 3 water budget study identifies the Queensdale municipal well is not able to meet future conditions, and as well it identifies that the the Arkell well number 1 has a high level of uncertainty. So that's why those areas, the WAPA Q was defined as a significant risk level. It's both scenarios.
Okay.
That's all I have.
The only comment I want to make is I do remember indeed when the city was going through the Tier 3 water budget report that the impact that the Arkell 1 well was having on that and the concern that was raised by the township in that contributing to this very large area that was going to be considered a significant risk area. So indeed, I'm concerned, because I looked at the report for last year, all right? So I looked at the report for last year and I thought, well, things were pretty much going the same this year as they were the previous year with Nestle's. How was your report last year? How was this report this year? And there wasn't a lot that had changed. The conclusions were essentially the same. Some of the wording had changed, including the comments that they've already made about the description of artesian versus confined. But in the end, my conclusions were the same this year on last year's report as last year on the year's prior report, was that it was no long-term effect. And so I was pleased with that response on the way things were going. There were some other things like the common reed that came up in it and that, so I'm pleased those have been clarified. And I appreciate both you and Nestle's coming here to clarify the details surrounding the report. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, back to our agenda. Next up, we have Trevor Hawkins from MHBC Planning.
They might be in the hallway.
Oh, is there somebody out in the hallway?
Yeah.
Welcome, it's a busy place tonight.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Trevor Hawkins here this evening, speaking in support of the zoning application for the kennel at 7272 Gore Road. Generally, we are supportive of the county planner's report and the proposed bylaw, although we do have a few questions and
Don't
comments.
need to put it that close.
Oh, sorry. Questions and comments related to the bylaw. The bylaw does establish a fairly specific area, 2,800 square meters, within which the kennel can operate. This property is 65,000 square meters, so it represents about 4% of the property. We believe the area has been established in part due to the adjacent commercial use, which is the trailer park. And if we look at the definitions in the township's bylaw for dwelling, building, or mobile home, the trailers don't meet the definition. That would be referred back to the dog license bylaw in terms of a residence or habitation that you would require separation from. And if we also looked at the township's new zoning bylaw, the trailers would be a recreational vehicle. They'd actually be a vehicle in the new bylaw as well, so they wouldn't meet the definition of a dwelling or habitation. So we were questioning and had some conversations with county staff about why the area was pushed so far over to the east side of the lands away from the trailer park, when there's a fairly large area of agricultural land on the west side of the property closer to the trailer park, within which Mr. Othman would like to train dogs. He's not intending to build structures in that area. In fact, the primary focus of his business is to train dogs, so he was certainly interested in using an existing open field area on the west side of the property to train dogs. And this bylaw, at least on the surface, would appear not to allow him to do so. So our hope was that council might consider expanding the area slightly to the west to give him a little more flexibility in which to train dogs, not house or board them, but to train them. And then if we look at the bylaw also restricts the size of the kennel building to 169 square meters, which is essentially the exact square meter size of the building as it exists today. He has no plans, Mr. Othman has no plans to expand the building in this immediate time frame, but the Planning Act would restrict his ability to submit a minor variance application should he want to do even a minor addition to that building in the future for 2 years, without permission from council to submit an application. So Mr. Othman was looking for a modest amount of flexibility in the event that he needed to make any type of addition or minor expansion of that building. The size of the building today would accommodate approximately 22 dogs, which is what he intends to operate. So even a 25% expansion of that square meter cap would bring him to maybe 30 dogs. And that's really all we would be looking for, a little bit of flexibility in case his training business is successful and he needs a little bit more space within that structure to train dogs. Actually, he does train dogs inside the building as well. And then finally, we were in conversations with county staff about the vacant lot that's located between this property and the hydro corridor. We noted that lot is of sufficient depth. If you measured from the back of the area where the kennel use would be allowed, and you used the 91.4 meters of separation in the dog license bylaw, you'd still have 50 meters on that property within which 50 meters of depth within which you could build a single detached dwelling and be outside of the 300 feet, 91.4 meters required in the dog license bylaw. So we felt that the kennel operation on this property, on Mr. Othman's property, would not sterilize that lot, and it would certainly be a lot within which anyone can build a single detached house towards Gore Road. But we're hoping that there will be some assurances that if Mr. Othman is successful and council approves the use, and he does operate his business and gets his kennel license, that if someone did, for some reason, decide to build a house all the way at the back of the property, it wouldn't result in Mr. Othman only losing his license, even though he was already operating in compliance with the bylaw.
Questions for the delegation? Councillor Rowe.
Has our staff or the county staff made any comments to this, or is this already in the report that we're voting on?
Want to update Madam CA?
Well, I think there hasn't been a response to what has been raised here this evening. I think that's fair to say. The report was prepared based on what county staff recommendation is at this time. What Trevor is presenting here tonight is an additional ask to what the county staff is currently recommending.
So are we asking for a deferral, or?
Well, certainly that would be up to council. I do want to just point out for council and for those in attendance with respect to this matter tonight. The report is listed on the agenda, and that is our typical practice, that the report comes before council first for consideration and includes the draft bylaw that would be considered as part of that report. We made an error in terms of including the actual bylaw in the bylaw section of the agenda, and so council, we would be recommending, as with our normal practice, that council, if they were even in favor of the bylaw as it is here on the agenda tonight, that would come forward at your next council meeting for consideration, because that is how we typically do it, because we notify those interested parties that are expressed an interest through the actual planning application process that the report's coming forward. They then have an opportunity, in addition to the applicant, to indicate whether they support or oppose and what those reasons are, either way, before council, and then council makes a determination then to bring the bylaw back to the next meeting,
So we're not voting on it tonight.
not the actual bylaw.
I have no
Yeah.
question.
Okay, Councillor Bulmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. I guess I want to make sure, before I ask my questions, it's clear that I do support the change, because I do see rural lands, agricultural lands as employment lands. But at the same time, I do support the current suggestion to provide some protection to the adjacent use. Understanding, of course, in my mind, when I think of, be it a recreational vehicle or a recreational home or a dwelling, I think it'd be hard not to agree that as a commercial use, one of the things they're selling is some peace and quiet of the countryside. I wouldn't want to necessarily negatively affect that business, in favor of another one. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant about this idea of moving the boundary. But I do have a couple of, I'm trying to figure out, you raised I don't know if my questions are more for yourself or for our county planner, but you did mention a number of putting a number in as opposed, you mentioned that you want up to 30 dogs and you think the current square footage would only allow 25. I guess when I read the staff report, and maybe this is a question for you can address, it appeared in the staff report that they're wrestling with an existing, I'll use the word non-conforming use, it's a nicer word, considering it as an existing use to meet the definition under the Greenbelt, so that we can at least provide some approval here, as opposed to if you want to go bigger than what's already there, that might not fit within the definition of an existing use within the confines of the Greenbelt policy. I'd like to hear how you feel that making it bigger would still fit in to the confines of the Greenbelt policy that the county is apparently struggling so hard to fit you into.
Through you, Mayor, I think if we take a step back and we look at the existing zoning on the property, zoned agriculture and natural environment, and we look at the county's official plan and the boundaries, the natural environment zone follows the boundaries of the county's OP environmental mapping fairly consistently. So someone could build a structure in compliance with the bylaw anywhere in that agricultural zone today. Mr. Othman is not intending to build anywhere within the natural environment structure. If we looked at the Greenbelt plan mapping, I think the mapping that the county staff has provided to me today, the mapping on the county's website actually shows the life science feature off this property, but the county's provided me with mapping today that generally coincides with their official plan mapping in terms of the boundary of the feature. And so the county's official plan mapping, which has the core and the Greenlands distinct boundaries, two different types of designations, really provides protection today for that feature. Mr. Othman, in his desire to potentially expand that structure, would be within the area that's been identified by the county as the kennel area that they've hatched. So it wouldn't be outside that area. It would simply be a minor addition within that area, in an area that's already zoned agriculture, within which a structure could be built. So I think the spirit and the intent of the Greenbelt plan is being maintained, and that the feature is not being harmed in any way. And Mr. Othman's not intending to do any development today. This is a hypothetical flexibility, really, to allow a minor addition to a structure. And if council has reservations about the ability for that minor addition to occur, we're satisfied that we can always come forward in the future if we need to. It's a fairly restrictive measure within a zone that already allows a lot of structures and a lot of far more intensive uses than a kennel use. And I think I'm of the opinion that a lot of the other uses that are already put in the agricultural zone would have far greater impact on those features than Mr. Othman of training of dogs.
So if I could, Mr. Chair, clarify, what you're looking for is it, leaving aside for a moment the expansion towards the commercial use or the recreational vehicles, you're looking for a modest expansion of the area to allow for a modest expansion of the building in the future. Just you'd like that hashed area to be just a little bit bigger, so that if and when they need an addition, it continues to fall within that hashed area without losing outdoor runs. Is that?
I think we'd be comfortable if council wanted to keep the hatched area as it is and allow an expansion of the building within that hatched area, and then added a clause into the bylaw that allowed Mr. Othman to train dogs with no structures in the agricultural area to the rear of the property, subject to fencing and the other hourly requirements that are already proposed in the bylaw. So no structures allowed in that back area, just literally the walking and training of dogs.
Okay. Thank you for that excellent clarification. Some members of council may recall that there was a group that was training dogs under agreement with the Hamilton Conservation Authority at the Fletcher Creek in the past, and which had to be without structures, and they were doing outdoor training with whistles and commands and things, and the neighbors asked to have it stopped. So that would be my only concern. There may be a part of the property where that's appropriate, but I'd certainly want to look at setbacks and distance, since we have some experience in the area with neighbors not being comfortable with that. Not that I'm trying to prevent anything here, but just going on the history. Maybe I could understand better what happened to that previous training, what the difference is. Understanding that future owners may take a different approach, and I want to make sure that neighbors are appropriately protected from any noise. So, and will we have a chance to ask the county planner a question?
Yes, but I want to go through all of council
No
first.
problem. I'll wait then.
Okay, Councillor Fielding?
Thank you. The variations you're asking for seem fairly minor, but I would like to hear from the county planner before we make a decision and possibly do a deferral. I don't know if it's something that can be done tonight, or if we
We're
have
not
to get...
voting on the bylaw tonight.
No,
so
that's
it's
correct,
going
yes, so
back
we can
to
hear, yeah.
county planning.
So I would like to hear from her and see what she thinks of the minor changes that you'd like.
Councillor Willis?
I have no specific questions of the deputant. However, This process has gone through a series of public meetings, and I really don't want to change the goalposts at this stage. To me, if we start entertaining this, we got to go back to the public all over again. That's my thoughts.
So I'm just going to make a comment, and then we'll bring our county planner into this. You make reference to the neighbors and the definitions of what they entail, but part of this land use planning process is avoiding conflicts, and I think that's what we're trying to ensure here, is that we avoid conflicts. I think we recognize that the use has gone on there for some time. I don't recall there being a long list of people phoning about it. I don't know if we've had any complaints about it. We do have somebody who's coming to council to express their view on this particular item a little later on. But I think that's where we're sort of sitting right now. From my perspective at this point, I'd encourage you to work with our planning department still to see if we can resolve this. So with that, I'd ask our county planner, Michelle Innocente, Councillor Roth, do you have any questions for her?
No.
Councillor Bomer.
Yes, thank you. Just
Yeah, you
one,
can come up here.
maybe two. This application is proceeding largely under the, I think it went ahead when it did, so it could take advantage of the policies under the old bylaw before we have the new bylaw in place. And the question I have relates to the definition of a kennel. If this is passed, which definition of a kennel will apply to the use? The one from the old bylaw, or the one from the new bylaw, or, you know what I mean? So, because we're only going a part of the property, is it possible to end up with two definitions on the property, where the part that's not zoned kennel will be subject to the new definition, and the part that is zoned kennel will be subject to the old definition?
Thank you, Councillor Ballmer, through you,
Just move the mic a little closer.
Mr. Mayor. With respect to the definitions, I think council is aware that the new zoning bylaw proposes a more comprehensive definition for the kennel use. It would seem appropriate that we could update the proposed amending bylaw to include that more detailed, updated definition as part of the amending bylaw, to ensure that we're covering all aspects of the uses proposed and ensuring that we're identifying the use properly. That would be my recommendation in that case.
Okay, so if we didn't do that, it is possible that we'd have two definitions of the same use in the same property then? That would address that concern then, I guess? Then they'd be consistent. The definition of the new definition would be in the new zoning, and the new definition would apply for everything around it.
That's right. Yeah, we would have a consistent definition across the zone in that case then. Yeah, that property.
The other question was mentioned about numbers of dogs, and that was brought up at the public meeting as well. I noticed in your report, it didn't talk about, or I think, well, you talked about limiting square footage as opposed to going after the numbers, and we had a bit of a discussion at the public meeting about that as well. I think about from a farmer's perspective, I mean, there's other regulations that control how many animals I have on the farm, whether it's Nutrient Management Act or minimum distance separate. All these things control the number of animals I can have on a farm. But I'm not familiar with anything else relating to dogs or kennels that relate to that would limit the numbers based on the square footage. So where do we see the protection coming from focusing on square footage as opposed to numbers, as was mentioned at the public meeting?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the drafting of the bylaw, there's a number of reasons that the size, the square footage was limited for the building, plus the square footage of the area to permit the kennel. I've tried to deal with it in multiple areas in the report, but one of the reasons to limit both the size and the area would be to ultimately to limit the number of dogs that could be housed, trained, boarded, raised for sale. Those limits, in light of not having that limitation in the dog licensing bylaw, that was the mechanism that I saw we could use in the amending zoning bylaw to begin to limit the actual capacity of the use. And so that is one of the reasons why the area was proposed to be limited. I'd like to note too that we proposed a limited area, and over the past several years, there have been a couple of site-specific kennels that have been permitted. The planning consultant refers to that in their justification. What they failed to indicate was that two of those site-specific zones actually limited the size as well. And so that has been something that the township has consistently done in recent amendments when it's dealt with kennels. And so when we reviewed it at the county, we saw that as being an opportunity in light of the dog licensing bylaw, not absolutely limiting the number of dogs as being one way in which we could look to support the application and also try to limit the actual size of the kennel.
So if I could, last question for clarification there. I understand the objective or the goal of limiting the size, but if there's nothing that limits the number of dogs per square foot, how do we limit the number of dogs by limiting the square feet? Is that clear?
It is clear, and I, through this review, we have our dog licensing bylaw, and there are elements in that control for noise and those aspects, and I understand that it's not actually limiting the exact number. So I guess I'm saying we don't have an exact mechanism at this point in time to limit the number of actual animals on the property in light of the dog license bylaw not doing that.
And we can't do it through zoning. So what you're saying, we can't put a number in there through zoning?
I mean, I wouldn't recommend it that we do it through zoning. I don't think that's the proper mechanism to do it through.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Councillor Fielding?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Councillor Stapoulis?
Yes, a question. In order for us to accommodate what the Deputy Dentist asked, would we have to go through another series of public meetings?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the original application was submitted for, the request was for a kennel use. It didn't define an exact area, so when notice was given, it was provided in that manner. The reason it's been scoped down as it has, in terms of my recommendation, is that as I started to review really starting with the Greenbelt Growth Plan policies and the natural environment in the area, that's where I began to scope down the use. And in terms of my review and the request to have a dog training area running adjacent to the Emerald Lake Trailer Park area, the Greenbelt Plan review that I didn't review it in that capacity, and I tried to be very careful in my report to say that my review was done in the context of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, which did limit that space. So in terms of my review, I haven't reviewed it in the context of those policies. There is a life science ANSI that runs on that northeastern portion of the property, and the Greenbelt Plan requires us to review new development, which a change in use is. In this case, we're amending the zoning bylaw to permit a kennel use. It is a new use. It would require us to review within 120 meters. And so we don't have a submission that did an environmental review in that context. And that's, as I say, I limited the area for a number of reasons. So Greenbelt size, a number of issues. So in terms of public notice, we, I believe, have provided it. And that's where the discrepancy is, where I have scoped the recommendation. It's not that we haven't provided public notice.
I have a question about, when I look at the mapping here, and I recognize it's just, it's not as detailed as maybe it could be, but there seems to be an open area that I believe is currently being used for an exercise area or training area, that sort of thing, that is adjacent to the property on the west. And it seems to be wooded further to the east. So if that area were not wooded, would it be possible to do the dog training in that particular area? I mean, is it a case of the area that's available to them that's been cleared for use is adjacent to another use. Where, when I look at this map, if I go east of that to where the adjacent, there's nothing there but what appears to be a farm field. If that area was more open, would it be able to be included in the way you're going here? Included this without having a potential conflict with the adjacent neighbor then?
Mr. Mayor, just so I'm understanding context, I don't know, I did print out some additional mapping.
Okay.
And I don't know, I don't necessarily want to introduce any additional
No,
information.
I'm
but-
just wonder if this has been considered or it wasn't considered because there's a wooded area.
Right, and within that wooded area, that's where the life science ANSI is, and it's considered a key natural heritage feature within the Greenbelt Plan, and that is what's triggering a number of policies. And so that's, yes, so it
So does
hasn't
the
been-
life science entity come all the way from the north limit of the property down to the hatched area now? Or is there any room behind that?
So it does not come exactly to the hatched area, but the required 30-meter vegetative
Setback.
protective zone does. And that's the minimum required area.
That was my only question
Okay.
about it. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, okay. I have a motion moved by Councillor Fielding and seconded by Councillor Sepoulis. The council receives the presentation by Trevor Hawkins, MHPC Planning, with respect to County Planning Report, Zoning Bylaw Amendment D14 FRE. All those in favor? That's carried. Just back to my agenda here for a second, and now we have, wrong agenda. We have Azar Othman is going to come up.
Good evening.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, council members, Mr. Hawkins pretty much, outlined our view on the whole thing, and the only thing I want to kind of reiterate is we're not looking for conflict at all with any of the neighbors, of course, and especially with the trailer park, because we understand they have to operate a business. I'm not really a boarding operation. I just wanted to make that clear. Like, most kennels are boarding operations. That's how they make their living. I'm actually a training operation. The boarding happens to be incidental to that. So the primary way that we make our living is we train dogs. And I just want to be clear, too, on what that entails. That's not, it's not like a 24-hour a day or even 8 hours a day. It might be once in a while we go outside and, we issue some commands to the dogs, and it literally would look like somebody walking their dog. So it's not a loud operation. It's not something that you would hear unless you were maybe within 50 meters. Most of the commands are issued in conversational manner. We don't use whistles. So as Mr. Hawkins said, I think it would be much more of an impediment to the trailer park if we were to run pigs or cattle back there, which technically we would be allowed to do, I assume, as opposed to training dogs once in a while. And we're very mindful of our neighbors. We're living on that property too now, and we have to experience it as well, and we want to keep things peaceful, and we're not looking to cause any conflict or issues, and we're very approachable, as our neighbors I'm sure will attest to, and we're willing to work with them. So and in relation to the of course we want to avoid having to restart this whole process, of course. So, if the council determines that, we have to operate within what the county planner has proposed, then we're okay with that. We would just obviously like to avoid coming back for minor variances in the future and going through that process if possible. And, right now, the square footage is limited by the proposal from the county planner, and you were asking about how that limits the number of dogs. There's only so many dogs you can keep within a specific amount of square footage in order to do so safely and, of course, in a healthy manner. And I think the new kennel bylaw addresses how dogs are supposed to be kept in solid
Just back up a
Oh,
little.
sorry, in solid-sided pens, and I think there's even a square footage stipulation of how much square footage is supposed to be there per dog. I could be wrong on that, but there are certain humane standards for keeping of dogs. So, you can't pack them in cheek by jowl, and we have to operate within that building. We have to train in that building as well. And so, the square footage does limit how many dogs we can keep there, and we're okay with that. But, he was talking about, right now, the building is quite small. It's about 55 by 35. It's not a big building at all. And, we were thinking that maybe down the road, if we're doing well, we might like to improve upon it a little bit. We're not talking about a huge expansion. But again, if that's something that council deems to be unreasonable, then we accept that, and we're fine with that.
Okay. Questions for the delegation? Councillor Roth?
No, I don't have any questions.
Councillor Bulmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for some of those clarifications. I understand, I do feel your pain. My friends and I can go trap shooting all we want, or hunting on the back pond all we want.
Maybe keep the questions to the delegation, Councillor Bulmer.
Yeah, so those noises are acceptable, but if it was a business, I wouldn't be allowed to do it. So I understand some of your comments in that regard. The questions I would have, though, is you said some interesting things about no whistles. When I think of other training that has taken place in the township, often it's included blanks for training hunting dogs and things. Would that be a factor of what you're using as well?
We do not train hunting dogs at this time. Our primary clients are pets.
So might I suggest I think what would give me some comfort is if we could look at the types of outdoor training that has caused problems in the area and try to define, for me, what's the difference in what you'd like to do in that area compared to the type of outdoor training that could cause a problem for that area. And maybe there's a way we can define that would suit both purposes. Does that make sense?
And perhaps a little bit more elaboration.
I think we're going to have a little bit of difficulty, Councillor Bulmer, trying to include in zoning bylaw a definition of a use down to that detail.
Yeah, that's what I'm struggling with too, is because it's not just what this owner's doing, it's what the next owner might do. I'm always struggling with. And I don't know, I'm not a planner. This is something for the two planners to put their heads together to see if that's even possible, much like they're saying it isn't possible to do through zoning or not supportive through zoning doing numbers. This is where I'm struggling with, because I hear what you're trying to achieve, but I'm trying to maintain that protection at the same time.
Well, Mr. Bulmer, I obviously can't offer you anything 100% concrete in writing, but I would say that where my business was previously located was in a strip mall, and certainly there was no shooting of anything allowed there in the city of Cambridge. So, we're primarily training pets.
But you can understand the concern, because even the township has had applications from people who want to use township land for training, which includes the firing of blanks. And in some parts of the township, that's appropriate, in some parts it's not. So,
yes, I understand.
thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fielding?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions about the outdoor possibility of training and so on. How many dogs would you have out at one time generally? Is it just you, or do you have other people training at the same time? Or
If there were clients there, generally our class would max out at about 10.
10 dogs?
Yes, with
clients.
the people who own them.
In this area, would the dogs be contained?
Yeah, there's a fence around that field. You can't really see it, but there's a fence between the trailer park and our property.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Spolis?
Yes, I have a question with respect to the square footage permitted per dog. Is there any kennel association that talks about typical standards?
No, but the Waterloo, the city of Waterloo does, if you look at their bylaw, it does stipulate, the Humane Society, the Waterloo Humane Society, it does stipulate the amount of space that each dog should have. Yes.
Was that something you would?
Yeah, because if we were ever subject to an investigation by the ASPCA, we would have to conform to that. There's like I said, there's laws that overarch the bylaw that we would have to meet. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and as you heard earlier when I was speaking to the representative from MHBC, I encourage you to work with our county planning staff to resolve this. Thank you.
Thank you.
A motion moved by Councillor Sabulis and seconded by Councillor Fielding. The council receives a presentation from Hazar Othman with respect to the county planning report, zoning bylaw amendment D14 FRE. All those in favor? That's carried. Next up, we have Rose and Jeff Jerica. I'm sorry if I... Welcome.
Good evening. Mr. Ballmer, you got a good memory. We live right down from when the other incident happened with the shooting and that, so.
You have up to 10 minutes.
Yes, okay.
We probably won't need that long.
Yeah.
But we live next door to Mr. Othman, and we're not challenging Mr. Othman's request to change the zoning from agricultural to kennel. We would just like to know what the maximum number of dogs, which we've overheard. I had this all written out before we came.
And we brought that previously up at the public meeting.
Yeah.
And that was very big concern for us on, not so much with Mr. Hoffman, but if he ever sold,
Yeah.
what would happen? We're right there.
Yeah,
We're in the corner of Gore and 7.
And Mr. Othman did confirm right now that there's around 22 dogs, and that when we spoke last, in fact, I just spoke with him the other day, and he advised that he would not be expanding from the current size, which now we're hearing that that's something different that he would like to possibly propose down the road. But the main reason we're here this evening is that we want to ensure there is something documented with the township, if that's possible, in case Mr. Othman does sell the property and the next person that buys it continues to run this location as a kennel, that they would not be able to expand it from its current size. And as I said, we're requesting that there be some sort of documentation with the township specifying the maximum number of dogs and kennels allowed in this location. Because we do live right next door to the property with the hydro buffer in between. And the dogs are not noisy. We do hear the dogs, but it's just during the day, and
It's fine.
It's fine. But if it does expand and there's more dogs, and the next owner all of a sudden, doesn't have the dogs under control the way that Mr. Othman does currently, that's our concern. Councillor Bowman said, that, we live out in the country because we do like our peace and quiet. So that's
All right, thank you.
what we're here for.
Questions for the delegation, Councillor Roth.
I'm not sure whether we can we put a restriction on that if the property's sold that goes to the new owner?
No, I believe the
can?
zoning goes
We
with the
can't
property.
do that. We can't do that. Okay.
I believe that was mentioned at the last meeting, that if the property's sold, if it can go back to agricultural, I think that was mentioned.
Kibosh,
No.
yeah.
That's why our concern is that it cannot grow any bigger than what it is currently.
And if the buildings can't grow any bigger, if like Dr. Hoffman said, if the number of dogs, that contains to the size of the building, maybe that takes care of the problem, I'm not sure.
So if it went from 22 to 26 dogs, you think it would be a problem? Or are you concerned that it might go from 22 to 50 dogs?
Exactly.
Yeah, and what was brought up last time was that there was problems within the community, I think, in Plisslant or wherever it was that Mr. Wallner brought up, it went to hundreds of dogs. So it went from small to someone bought it and it just exploded. That's our biggest fear, that, we've lived in Plisslant for a
Councillor
long
Roth?
time.
That's all the questions I have.
Councillor Bulmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think perhaps my question is for the CAO, if I could, about licensing. We've heard quite a bit that we can't achieve what they're looking for through zoning. We can't achieve what they're looking for through our current kennel licensing bylaw. But understanding that bylaws can be updated, is it possible to update our kennel bylaw in the next couple of years, that we could see that it does have some numbers associated with it, and if there's a problem, those numbers can be amended? on an annual basis when they apply for their next license?
Okay, I guess there are a couple of factors. First, I'll indicate with respect to the current kennel licensing bylaw, it's scheduled for review in 2021. Secondly, when you talk about numbers, I guess, Councillor Bummer, there's a couple numbers that come to mind. I know that there's the issue or comment that was raised by Trevor as with respect to, I'll call it what he referred to, sterilization of the other lot. I'm going to make it clear that the kennel licensing bylaw would not restrict what could go on that lot. Zoning would dictate what could go on that vacant lot. And yes, someone could build close to the rear yard, and then there would be the potential impact that under our current licensing bylaw, that the kennel license for this particular property would not be granted. So I think I would say that I think there is, the township should consider when it is reviewing its kennel licensing bylaw, whether they should have a standard with respect to distance within a kennel licensing bylaw and within a zoning bylaw. And since our current zoning bylaw and our proposed zoning bylaw suggests that kennel licensing be done on a site-specific basis, I think there is merit in the township considering that setbacks from other types of property uses be considered through the site-specific zoning process alone. With regard to, I think the question, perhaps Council Vermel, has to do with the number of animals that can be kept in the kennel and the size of the kennel. I believe those standards are typically set within a kennel licensing bylaw. However, I would have to check into that further, and certainly, if they are, certainly that can be considered during a kennel licensing bylaw review.
So at worst case scenario, we'd be looking at 2 or 3 years at this size with a question, but once the new kennel licensing bylaw came into place, we could we could control any numbers then.
We could look at the...
Possibly,
yes.
And to go back to your first point about sterilizing the other lot, if I understand it correctly, I think what I understood is there's no minimum distance separation arc being produced by this that would prevent the neighbor from building in a place that would then, it works the opposite. The neighbor could choose to build their house anywhere on that lot.
Within the setback requirements of zoning at the time.
That's right.
On that lot, yes.
Which could negatively affect this land use. As opposed to this land use wouldn't prevent.
Not necessarily. I'm just couldn't necessarily affect that particular land use, but I don't think it's fair to say that what they're proposing here doesn't impact that particular vacant lot, having a structure on it, and it will not necessarily achieve those distances that are in the current kennel licensing bylaw and the purpose for it being there, those distances, to deal with noise and impacts on that property.
Oh, okay, so you're suggesting that if someone does choose to build a house in that lot, the new bylaw could influence where they'd be permitted to build the house?
No.
Oh, the opposite, they could build
Yes.
anywhere, and then it would back affect the kennel?
Correct.
Okay. So it's a risk the kennel is taking by putting it in before there's a house?
Based on the current wording of our kennel licensing bylaw,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, I see. I'm sorry to go off topic of the delegation, but you raised some of those questions I wanted to try and address. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Okay. Councillor Fielding?
Yes, sorry, it just sounds, just addressing the CAO, what you're just saying, if I'm reading this properly, it just seems kind of doesn't make sense. I mean, if one existing use is already there and they're running and they're legal because they'd be zoned and have a license and so on, it doesn't seem to make sense to me that somebody else can come in and do something that would basically put them out of business. I don't understand how that would work. Maybe.
Yeah, licensing isn't where you don't get the legal non-conforming use like you do with zoning. So that's why I did indicate that there may be merit in us looking at our kennel licensing bylaw and just considering whether we should just deal with setbacks from different uses within a site-specific zoning and not also having it in with our licensing bylaw.
Okay. I guess the other question would probably have to be addressed to Ms. Vincente. The current proposal that we have before us, are the setbacks and so on set in there so that we wouldn't get into the situation of the other lot right now? Like, not not for what the changes that they're asking for, but currently what we have, has that been built in?
I understand the question, are you saying for the vacant lot?
No, for the kennel and the setbacks and so on, you said that you had worked on. Would that protect this particular kennel from basically being put out of business where someone could place a home?
No.
No?
No,
Okay,
not as per the dog license bylaw.
okay. So it's quite a big risk then? Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's, yeah.
Councillor
No, I
Sapoulis.
have no questions.
Thank you very much. A motion moved by Councillor Fielding and seconded by Councillor Sapoulis. The council receives the presentation by Rose and Jeff Jurica with respect to County Planning Report Zoning Bylaw Amendment D14/FRE. All those in favor? That's carried. All right. Next up, we have Vanessa Knox. Oh, Vanessa Knox? All right. How far did we get there? Well, we've done, we're not considering the bylaw on the kennel. March building report we did, correct?
Yes, but you're doing the report for
On-
the kennel.
For the kennel?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, just receiving the report?
And whether you're going to move the bylaw forward in its current format, or if we're going to defer for further discussions to take place.
Okay, let me read it and then I'll ask.
You may need to
Yep.
the second paragraph.
So a motion moved by Councillor Fielding and seconded by Councillor Sapoulis. The council receives the planning report of the County of Wellington Planning and Development Department zoning bylaw amendment D14/FRE 7272 Gore Road, Part Lot 30, Concession Gore. And then I'm just going to stop there because it says the next line would have said, this isn't part of the motion, the council approves the zoning bylaw amendment for this report. So where do we want to go from here? Councillor Roth.
That's a real good question. I would like to get some information from staff, from the county and our staff, to see what the right thing to do is here. I think they're equipped to do that.
Councillor Bowman?
I'd like to give them time to work it out.
Yes, I concur.
Councillor Fielding? Councillor Sapoulis?
Question with Councillor Bloomer. When you say time to work it out, is that between staff and the proponent?
Yes.
Okay, I would agree with that as long as it doesn't require a regurgitation of the entire
Yeah.
process. I
don't
really
think
don't
it
want to
does.
go there.
No.
Same.
Maybe, if I can, a refinement of where we are, if there's any way that they can work on, between the two of them, the situation that we have is well, I think we should give them a time frame to work on this between now and our next evening meeting, where we would consider the bylaw.
Well, if I
month.
have a
Councillor
question.
Bowman?
I don't know what's our urgency. I think that should be driven by the applicant, would it not? I'm not sure, was there a necessity for us to be concerned about the timing?
There's an existing use on the property that we're currently trying to go through a process to ensure that it's covered off by existing rules. So I would think that it's been a long time getting to this. We're down to the fine details is what I would describe them. I would feel more comfortable if we added some sort of time frame that we gave them. A month or 2 months, I'm okay with that. But I think to just leave it open-ended isn't fair to either party.
Okay.
So if there's some caution on, we're in April now, we can say till the evening meeting in June, and we'll consider it at that point. Are we all right with that? Okay, so we're just receiving the report then, okay? All those in favor? That's carried. Okay. We did the building report, though, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Final comments, delegation summary table, township comprehensive zoning bylaw. And I just, yep, did you add that to here? No, okay. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Bomer and seconded by Councillor Roth. The council receives the correspondence received by Mark Reed dated April 18th, 2018, with respect to the comprehensive zoning bylaw. All those in favor? Okay. What's next here? A motion moved by Counselor Fielding and seconded by Counselor Sepoulis. The council receives the final comments, delegation summary table, Township Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw. Any discussion on that? Counselor Roth.
No.
Counselor Bowman.
Just one that stood out that when we had the discussion at the last meeting, there was some agreement, I thought, on the removal of the word temporary regarding the farm help, residents for farm help, but I noticed it was still in there, and I didn't see it reflected in these changes, but you know, on the scale of things, I think it's one of the many things. I think we're going to have to keep a list for our first housekeeping amendment. When I look at how quickly Guelph Aramasa found they needed to do a housekeeping after theirs, I think, you know, we've caught pretty much everything we need to catch in the big round.
In this round.
You know, we'll leave the rest to housekeeping, I think.
Okay. Counselor Fielding.
Yeah, I feel we've gone over this and been working on this, and Nancy has helped us so much, and I feel that we're there now. We're ready to accept it, so I'm okay with everything.
Counselor Sepoulis.
Yes, I agree that we're ready to move on and leave the rest for the catch-all.
Okay. All those in favor then? That's carried.
Can I just?
Yep.
I do just want to point out, I know we've had further discussions because there, as council is aware, and I see Kelly and I see Nancy in the audience. I know Michelle's gone, but there have been numerous changes coming forward as it relates to transition provisions regarding appeal processes and regarding the effective date of, and how you're dealing with a particular application. I know, speaking with both the county and Nancy, and due to the recent release of the regulatory the regulations as it relates to the transition provisions, the notice of appeal will require that any appeals would be filed by the local appeal tribunal, the new tribunal, just so that council is aware.
Great.
Oh, okay, and not moved.
Okay, so I'm going to read this out. Then I'll, pardon me, ask for a mover and seconder. So the report REC 2018, 002, regarding the Puss Lynch Community Center Park back soccer fields be received. And the council authorizes the single source retainer of Landscape Planning Limited to complete the 2018 design works to option, and that's a blank at this point, and an upset limit of, and that's a blank as well, to be funded from the cash in lieu of Parkland Restricted Reserve and the Parks and Recreation Services Development Charges Restricted Reserve, and that council directs staff to apply to the following grant funding programs: Canada Infrastructure Program Phase 2 and the Ontario Trillium Fund capital grants, and the council directs staff to provide this information to the Puss Lynch Minor Soccer Club, and that the Puss Lynch Minor Soccer Club advise the township by June 30th, 2018 regarding the potential contributions to be made to this project in order for staff to outline funding for the selected option in the 2019 capital budget and to facilitate upon budget approval construction in 2019 and the timing of construction impacts and how scheduling challenges will be addressed. So I need a mover and a seconder, and then we're going to go through the discussion and decide where we're going to go with this, including selecting an option, which will then generate dollars. So who'd like, moved by Councillor Fielding, seconded by Councillor Sepoulis. Okay, Councillor Rowe.
Well, I have a little difficulty with this. I'm not comfortable making a decision tonight as to what option we're going to use and what upset limit we're going to declare when we don't have any idea of any funding that we may or may not get. And I can't vote in favor of this at this time. I know we want to go forward with doing something for the soccer field, but without knowing the funding, we could miss the boat on getting a really nice soccer field, or we're going to have to go to the most inexpensive one without any funding. So I don't know how we can decide this tonight. You know, the Canada Infrastructure Program and the Trillium Fund, we may not qualify, we may not get it. Soccer says they'll contribute some money, but until we know what they're going to commit to, how can we decide which one of these 7 options we want? I mean, they're it for tag on this one. They want the fields, and they did commit to raise funds, but I think we should go ahead and try and get that in line before we decide, especially on which option to use. So I can't support this.
Okay, Councillor Bulmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm somewhat in line with Councillor Roth on this. In some ways, I think we're putting the cart before the horse here. The township invested significant funds in the Recreation Master Plan and had discussions, wasn't comfortable with any of the recommendations from that master plan and sought an additional recommendation, which we all committed to taking to the public to confirm. And we haven't done that yet. And that we all agreed that that was a good thing to do, that we need to take that revised plan to the public prior to committing to any one of these pieces. Although those pieces could certainly be built in isolation or one at a time. I mean, as I suggested earlier, that I'd raise the point of possibly at least just bringing it up to the standard of Arkle, which is, we're talking some topsoil and some grass seed. I'm not an expert, but at least for a practice pitch or something. But then, to his credit, Mr. Creed raised the point that even doing that could create parking problems over there. So I would like to do something that got them at least another field to play on, but I don't know if we can do that with, bringing it up to Arkle standards without also doing some parking. And I don't know what that cost would be. So I guess what comes back to it is I think we're putting the cart before the horse on committing to any portion of that permanent redevelopment until we've gone to the public with the revised plan that we invested a great deal in to get. So, thank you.
Councillor Fielding?
Thank you. Well, I've been an advocate for trying to get this going, and I think we need a champion and we need to get organized. I see what Councillor Roth is saying. There may be the possibility of a grape field. We haven't really explored donors and things like that, and I think I know there are some out in the township that would help out a lot and have a lot of expertise in that area. I guess I kind of would like to defer to Councillor Sapoulos, who brought this up, and maybe go back to what he had in mind, because to me it sounded something very simple to more like what Councillor Bulmer is explaining about something that not a great soccer field, but something that you can use as practice and so on. So I think I would, I too am not ready to pick an option at this point. So.
Okay, Councillor Sapoulos.
Yes, the reason I suggested this at the beginning was that I thought we could do something for at least $500,000 and pay it all out of the parkland dedication. That's what I was looking at. I was looking at the engineering cost in the order of $40,000. That's the number that stuck in my mind, and I thought we could accomplish all that. Quite frankly, these big numbers scare me. One of the staff tables, and I thank staff for going through and providing a detailed analysis of this. Like one of the tables talks about taxation levy, and I can't, in all honesty, ask any of the impose a levy to pay for any of this stuff. I would like to see doing something that's reasonable, but at the same time, doing phase one all at once, I don't think we'll ever get the chance to do that. That's a big ticket item. So my suggestion is to still look at phase one, but break it up into 2 phases. Look at doing a soccer field and do a proper soccer field, not a soccer field that we'll regret later. So my thought coming here was going to be is, well, let's have staff look at a hybrid option that gives us a Cat 3 field. It's lighted, benches, parking, landscaping, and see what the costs are associated with that. Like my quick numbers looking at it, it's under $1 million, somewhere in the order of 800,000, but certainly I do not feel comfortable going forward with a big-ticket item in terms of a design cost at this time. I understand what Councilor Bloomer's saying. We can wait to the public, but at the same time, I think when we go to public, the Phase 1 cost is going to make everybody gulp. It's $1.5 million, and I think if we can break that up into manageable chunks and we can partition that over the next few years and say, we're going to try to get it from donations and from the parkland dedication fee and not have, or very minimal levy on this. I really don't want to have a big levy. I really don't. I don't think it's right. Because we're only satisfying a small segment of the community with this soccer field. There's other important issues too that we should be raising the levy for as opposed to a soccer field. So my suggestion is, let's go to the public meeting, let's hold off on the design. In the meanwhile, look at splitting up Phase 1 into manageable chunks that we can say to the public, here's Phase 1, here's Phase 2, but we think we can go ahead and do Phase 1 for this amount, and here's the associated plans for that.
Okay, so the last time we were talking about this, and then subsequent to that, Councillor Zaboulis, your comments, is what we had talked about was the next time we were going to talk to the public, we had to have some sort of idea of numbers and funding, how we were going to handle this, to go to them. Because indeed, the numbers are large, and they will scare everybody, and everybody will say, we can't afford this, and that's it. But I also think that in order to apply for funding, and I'm looking at the Director of Finance, we have to have a known project with some sort of budget associated with it in order to make an application for some sort of funding. So if we're intent on going after, provincial or federal funding through some program, we're going to have to commit to some sort of project size, and package that somehow to try and put that together with some sort of funding. We don't have to do that right now, but at some point, if we're going to consider that as a part of the funding stream, we've got to commit to something. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we want them to kick in their portion, because whatever it is, we'll still have to pay a portion of it. The other thing is there's the efficiency issue, and I understand Councillor Zaboulis and what Councillor Bulmer said about some topsoil and some grass seed is that there were some drainage issues, if you recall, and the big ditch that we have there, and that if you were going to work on this, to try and do one part without doing the other part meant you were going to go back and redo the other part over again. So there were additional costs associated with that. So, and I think, Councillor Zaboulis, you'd like to see soccer get some, or more use out of the field than they're currently getting out of it right now. Wasn't that part of your initiative, right? So maybe there's some middle ground here, is that, and I don't want to just push this back to staff, because I think they put a lot of work into these reports that we're seeing here. And at some point, we have to make some sort of a commitment. So maybe at this point, we can look at possibly some topsoil and some grass seed, or ask the soccer club if they feel if we spent a few $1,000s on something that would it improve the level of the field so it was more usable to them currently, or not. And if not, fine. If it's within, I don't know, come up with a limit, $5,000 or $10,000, I have no idea what we're talking about here, how much that would potentially cost. Does it make it more usable for them in the short term? And then somehow we start looking at what options are available. But often these funding programs are announced. We don't know what's coming down the road. They're announced, and we have a certain time frame not only to apply, get granted the funding, but complete the project within this. So we have to have something ready to go. So I guess I'm suggesting at this point, we ask soccer, can we add some little thing there? But we're going to have to come to some sort of, what is our vision for the future of this? Where do we want to get to? And then we figure out what the steps are to get there. We do need to have a public meeting again, because we do need to involve the public. But we have to have set their expectations that, the taxes aren't going to go up by 20 or 30% in order to accomplish this. And keeping in consideration this idea with the lack of efficiency. If we only do a bit, as you suggested, that we recognize that we're going to be going back to redo something else, because that's all we can handle at this point in time. Now, I'm okay with either approach if council wants to do that, but each of them has their positives and their negatives associated with it. So what do we want to do? Councillor Routh, back to you with an open question.
Well, I don't know. Like, I don't think we can afford many of these options without funding. If I think we need a commitment from minor soccer first to see what they're willing to raise. I think we had talked about trying to find some businesses in the community that might champion this, and we haven't done any of that yet. And, you know, that'll make a big difference in the end result. At the same time, I agree we should do something. And I think if we made that soccer field playable or more playable rather than just a practice field this year, and in the meantime, try and get some of this other stuff done, and I'm not sure how we do that, whether we have to get a committee to do that or find someone to champion this. But, you know, there's a lot of money out there for something like this, and we just haven't tapped it yet. And I don't have a whole lot of faith in the government funding, so I don't think we can rely on that.
Okay, to be fair, though, what we said was, before we went out to the public to try and do any fundraising or to the private sector to try and, we had to have what they were contributing to, not just this open-ended soccer field. This was our vision, this was, you know, what we were intending to do, and we were asking for their help to get there. But we're going to have to put some definition around it before we can actually go and, you know, be fair and ask somebody for contributions towards it.
Well, I kind of like Councillor Sapoulis' thought of separating or dividing Phase 1 into something that is a little more affordable. But as long as it coincides with our end result and that we don't have to do a whole lot of work over and over again. Because that's been the problem in the past. Everything's just been done and then it's in the wrong place. So I think that's my biggest fear. But I don't know what else to say. I don't want to commit to any one of these phases at this time. Because
So
they all look a little bit out of reach to me.
Okay, so maybe what we consider then is, these are the options before us. We can't make a commitment to any of the options because we don't know the funding. I think probably everybody said the same thing. We don't know what the funding is. We go to a public meeting with our options and say, this is what we're gearing towards. And if soccer says, we definitely want to have lights, we say to them, well, how are you going to contribute towards that? I mean, with the package that we have here, at least we have some goal in mind. It may be uncertain at this point in time, but it's depending on the funding that we can achieve. Even option 1 is challenging without some sort of outside funding, right?
Yeah, well, Phase 1 includes relocating the baseball diamond. And that, to me, is a big question mark. Do we really want to do that in Phase 1?
Yeah.
So that, to me, right off the bat, that doesn't make sense. But certainly the soccer field is in the back. It's going to be out of the way. I understand there's a cost, and industry, you call it throwaway cost because of inefficiencies or sunk costs, whatever you want to call it. But that soccer field and that baseball diamond might stay where they are for the next 5-6 years, just simply because of funding. We got all kinds of pressures. And I'm looking for something that we can get easily and readily identifiable, and splitting up Phase 1 into a manageable chunk.
So what would you consider chunk 1 in Phase 1 then?
The soccer field with parking.
Just soccer field with parking?
Correct.
Okay.
A good soccer field,
Good
not a Category 3 soccer field.
Okay. Councillor Fielding?
Thank you. I think we need to look a bit in our past. I mean, we did do very well with the help of the Optimist Club and other donors to raise a very large amount of money for our org. But at the time, we were very successful with getting grants from the government. My recollection is the important thing about that is they want you shovel ready. So we, you know, if that comes up, we have to have something. I would like to see us go to the public with something more tangible. I think 7 options are too many to take to the public. I think it's our responsibility as a council to at least pare it down to maybe 3 or 4 at the most, best-case scenarios that we take. I mean, we know that there would be some people that would say option 6 just because it's the least expensive, and they would say, well, I want that because I know I'll never use it. But that's not really fair, and that's probably not the quality that we want to have in our community. So I think we need to sit down. It may even have to be a separate meeting and amongst council, and hash out a few options that we can take to the public. And I think, if you don't have the money right there, you're always going to say, oh, we can't do it because we don't have the money. We do have to have some faith. And I would like to have a decision made so that when the money does come available, we're ready to go. So to me, the planning is important, and I would like to see us make a decision in some way to get that done so we can be shovel ready.
Okay. Councillor Bulmer.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to comments both yourself and Councillor Roth made, which I think I agree with, is we need a vision first. And we are talking about options that are a part of a vision that we haven't endorsed yet. The revised plan that we're all talking about, that these options are largely part of, we haven't endorsed yet. And I agree with you 100% that we need to formalize that vision, and how we then move on from that. I agree with Councillor Sapoulis that certainly phase 1 needs to be divided up. That would make much more sense, but we haven't got that vision confirmed yet. And that's what we can get by going to the public, whether that's, we were going to do it next year, but I seem to recall that last time we talked about this, we also came up with a funding formula. We decided we were going to use examples from the past on how we were going to divide this up. So I think we have a lot of those pieces ready to go. We may not know the total amounts, but I believe we set an upset limit that we were willing to contribute as a municipality, what we're going to look for from other partners and other levels of government. So I'm really concerned. I mean, Councillor Roth made the point of constantly jumping ahead and doing it. Well, that's what I think we're doing right now, is if we haven't committed to the vision yet, as you pointed out, and I think that's a step we need to go forward. So if that takes a couple of years to eventually get the shovels in the ground after that public meeting, it makes sense that if we can make a modest investment to make it safe to stop ankles being twisted in the meantime, because we know they're using it, right? So I'd like to make sure we at least make it safe for them to use, taking into account the concern of Mr. Creed regarding parking. And then we go and establish that vision, and then we move forward, because then we've committed to the vision, the community's committed to the vision, and we all have an idea of how much we're going to commit to the project. Does that make sense?
Yep. And I got a suggestion here. I think that it's 20 to 10. I agree that the number of options is daunting.
Yeah.
That we need to commit to the vision, that we have to try and bite off a chunk that we can deal with. But I think back to the ORC, and I remember sitting in the gallery how that rolled out. Was originally the Optimist had a plan for something that they were going to fundraise for. And after that they had already gone ahead, started with the planning process, that's when all the grants became available, and it expanded dramatically from, I think it was like 600,000, somewhere in that sort of time range, out to 2 million, based on the fact that the grants suddenly became available. So if we're in the position where we can do something similar to that, and if the grants become available, fine. And if they don't, then the Optimist would have built an unrefrigerated, no gymnasium, covered rink over there, which would have worked fine until additional funding was available. So if we can come up with that idea, then I think we're okay.
Yeah.
But quite frankly, I think we've been around a few times on this, and I'm thinking I'd rather have a special meeting about this, to talk about this, where we can look at some things on the board, talk about some potential options. I don't want staff to do a whole lot of work without us giving them some future direction at this point in time. But how about if we set aside a separate meeting where we can spend an hour or two on this by itself? Is everybody supportive of that?
I am.
Okay, Councillor Bulmer? Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
A working council.
A working council meeting where it's the only item,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Special council meeting. Okay? So we're not going to do anything with that.
So you're going to defer it to a special council
To a council, yeah. We'll come up with a date, and we'll sit there and
Soon.
drag out the plans or do whatever and see if we can narrow it down and stage it a little more coarser with something that we can initially bite off on and that we're all okay with. And then at that point, we're going to have to ask, well, I think we need to talk to the Puslin Binder Soccer as well. In fact, it might not be a bad idea to invite them to the meeting.
Yeah, I think that would be.
It'd be a good idea to have their input at that point in time, because then they're willing to make a commitment or decide how they want to proceed and what they can use in the short term.
Here's the question then, would this be with an eye to getting that, endorsing the entire vision maybe this year rather than waiting until next, so that we could, I mean, that's where I can see that what's holding up the funding is we haven't endorsed the overall plan. And that's where I'd like to see if we,
I think I'd like to get us talking about it at that meeting, but I'm not sure I want to make that a goal of the meeting. I think the goal of the meeting is initial steps.
Right.
Certainly the long-range vision, but if it's a 10-year vision and it's all dependent on funding, we leave it at that point in time.
oh, but at some point we have to commit to, this is the plan for the site, so we're not building
Yes.
piecemeal before we've committed, this is the long-term plan, but right now we're still talking just a piece of the long-term plan, we haven't committed to the overall vision.
Long-term plan.
Yeah.
Certainly, we'll have a lot of discussion about it, but I think we need to do that commitment at a public evening.
I do
meeting.
too.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, Councillor Spoulos.
Just for the meeting we're going to have, I'm going to suggest that you put in on overhead slides the plan that we had talked to, and as well as the existing site plan, so we can look at it and
Okay.
discuss it.
Or maybe
Maybe-
even a blown up part that we could write, a paper
Yeah, it
copy.
might not be a
yeah.
bad one we can lay out on the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah.
And can we refresh the PDFs to Councillor Bulmer on those, so that, under Councillor Bulmer, how do you,
Just
how do
make it
you
bumpy.
handle, I have to ask, how do you handle, how would you prefer to review a diagram like that?
If I can get them ahead of time, I guess someone describe them to me, and I use my imagination, having walked the site a lot, and
All right.
I just need some time ahead of time to have it described.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
All right, we'll do that then. Okay, so that's that then. We didn't vote on the motion, we withdrew it. Or what do you want
Oh,
to do?
no, you're deferring
We're
it.
deferring
Deferred
it.
it.
Do it.
So I'll use the same mover and seconder, and,
Yep. Okay, all those in favor? It's deferred.
okay, thank you.
We have a motion moved by Councillor Roth and seconded by Councillor Bulmer. The following bylaw be taken as read 3 times and finally passed in open council. A bylaw to prohibit the use of land and the erection and use of buildings or structures except for certain purposes, and to regulate the type of construction and the height, bulk, location, size, floor area, density, character, and use of buildings or structures. Any discussion on this? Councillor Bulmer.
This is a grand moment.
It is.
This is a grand moment. I have been on council since 2000, looking forward to this. This has been on the books every term that I was on council, and probably every term that you were on council
got
as
there.
well, so.
Anything else? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay. Motion moved by Councillor Bulmer and seconded by Councillor Roth that the following bylaw be taken as read 3 times and finally passed in open council. Bylaw 024-2018 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council for the corporation of the Township of Puslinch at its meeting held on the 18th day of April 2018. All those in favor? That's carried. A motion moved by Councillor Roth and seconded by Councillor Bulmer. The council hereby adjourns at 9:44 PM. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, ladies.
Karen.
So, looks like we're getting a